Warzone 2 and Modern Warfare 2 are claiming that there's going to be a big upgrade and update to Ricochet Anticheat. But what does that exactly mean, and will it actually make a difference? Warzone 1's Anti-Cheat Ricochet was eventually released in the game quite late into its life cycle, and prior to the anti-cheat even existing, cheating in Call of Duty was both incredibly easy and a horrendous experience. I remember there would be days where I would stream the game and I'd run into 7 or 8 cheaters in a single session. Now I run into maybe 1 or 2 a week, which is pretty good. Sometimes maybe 3 or 4, but those are just the obvious rage hacking cheaters. There could of course be others as well, there's no guarantee that they make it through alive in any given round. But generally speaking, Ricochet Anti-Cheat did make a major difference to the game. But it isn't perfect, and cheating definitely still exists, and much like most other anti-cheats, you'll never really completely get rid of it. So what do Call of Duty mean when they say that Ricochet is receiving an upgrade for Warzone 2 and Modern Warfare 2? And will it actually make a difference to the number of cheaters in the game and greatly reduce them? Well, the answer is yes and yes. The upgrade is in fact real, and I'll explain how it should work. And yes, it should actually make a fairly substantial difference in the game. Oh, and before we continue this video, consider subscribing to the channel. We're super close to 100,000 subscribers, and if you want to see everything related to Warzone 2 and Modern Warfare 2, make sure you stick around. So before I explain this upgrade and how exactly it could make a difference in the game and actually improve the situation, let me explain briefly how Ricochet works, and it's a 3/4 prong approach. The first one is a kernel level system scanner. Now what this does is that it effectively actively scans your computer whilst you are playing to make sure that nothing is being injected into the game itself and no cheats are being used to circumvent the anti-cheat. Now this isn't a perfect fix for the game, as the kernel level anti-cheat in Warzone is not a kernel 0 anti-cheat, so when the game is not running, the anti-cheat does not run. Other games like Valorant, for example, have an anti-cheat that constantly runs on your computer even if you aren't playing the game, which can make cheating a little bit more challenging. The second is server-side communication. The anti-cheat on your system communicates with servers on the Call of Duty end to identify that the anti-cheat is in fact running correctly and hasn't been compromised or circumvented. The third method are data points and metrics. The game will use in-game statistics like accuracy, headshots, and other little data points here and there to identify whether or not a player is achieving an unreasonable or unrealistic amount of skill in the game. So for example, if somebody gets 100% headshots throughout a 30-minute game, there's a good chance that they're probably cheating, and it's very unlikely that that would happen for a normal player. And the final method actually requires a lot of legwork from the anti-cheat team, and this requires understanding the habits of anti-cheats and also legal action behind them as well. So what this means is that the people behind the anti-cheat will learn how certain cheats and cheat providers are circumventing the system and implement new ways to stop that happening, or update the anti-cheat in such a way that it can detect it. This has notoriously happened a couple of times where they have updated Ricochet and led to vast swathes of specific providers having all of their clients banned in-game. And where possible, the anti-cheat team will communicate to the legal team of Activision that there are cheat providers who are operating that could be taken down for violating their terms of services. At the moment, Activision have multiple legal cases that they've gone through, and there is one really large legal case that they've thrown at a very large cheat provider, of which I will not name for obvious purposes. They don't exactly deserve the attention. All of these methods that they have so far are really solid, and they're industry standard, tried and tested methods that will improve the cheating situation in your game. But the fourth one of lawsuits is definitely something only larger companies do, and Activision actually does deserve a lot of praise for doing that. Now, generally speaking, anti-cheats are not something that will definitively stop cheating right away. Think of it more like a 100-meter sprint, and the anti-cheat every once in a while throws up a hurdle which makes it harder to finish the race. Over and over again, the anti-cheat will throw up more and more hurdles and create new hurdles along the way to either eventually stop the cheater in their tracks and ban them, or make the overall process so time-consuming, so jarring, and so frustrating for cheaters who are regularly being banned in the game that they just stop bothering. So what exactly does it mean when they say that Ricochet Anti-Cheat is receiving an upgrade for day one? Well, it means that the system is going to be creating many more hurdles, and is using a lot of information and data to do exactly that. Now you have to bear in mind, Warzone 1's anti-cheat and the initial release of Ricochet was kind of bolted onto the side of Warzone. It wasn't something that was developed from the ground up, and whilst I imagine it took a lot of effort, it also meant that certain systems may not have been as advanced or as technically capable as they would have wanted. So one of the methods we talked about was data points and statistics, things like headshots, accuracy, win percentages. If a brand new account, which is extremely low level, starts winning 10 Warzone games in a row all of a sudden, there is a possibility that that person is cheating. Or if they get 100% headshot ratio and don't miss a shot, there is a good chance that they might be cheating, and the anti-cheat will then check that account. And that is something that is already available. With Warzone 2 and Modern Warfare 2 being developed from the ground up with Ricochet anti-cheat in mind, they can create more and more data points for the game to utilize to identify suspicious behavior. Here is a really good example of this that will explain what I'm talking about here. At the moment, there is an accuracy statistic in Warzone 1, which can be used to detect cheaters. Somebody with 100% accuracy is probably likely using an aimbot. But there is a bit of an issue with this statistic, because you're only technically accurate if the bullet hits the target where you intended, and that also includes factoring in bullet velocity. Now, cheaters who are using new accounts tend to have some of the worst weapons in the game unless they're using unlock tools, or if they're using ground loot, for example. And this can be a really tricky way for the anti-cheat to identify a cheater, because it does factor in bullet velocity in the accuracy statistic. Let's say a cheater with an aimbot picks up a really trash weapon, and because it has really low bullet velocity, even though his aimbot is clicking on heads left, right, and center, he isn't actually hitting the target because the gun simply isn't good enough to keep up with his cheats. And this is what I mean by creating new data points. The Ricochet anti-cheat team, for example, could create a statistic that allows them to identify when somebody has been 100% accurate without bullet velocity being factored in. Let's say he's snapping to heads across the map, but because the bullet velocity on his weapon is low, he's only hitting maybe 70 to 80% of the actual targets. Now, they could have a statistic which identifies that he was 100% accurate without factoring in bullet velocity, which may be a quicker way for them to identify suspicious behavior. With artificial intelligence, machine learning, and anti-cheat systems, you could also theoretically make a system where it's easier to identify somebody aimbotting, because they will have their reticle fixed to a player who is behind cover. And that is a system that might, again, be able to identify suspicious gameplay. They can also use these systems to identify when an account which has been generally average suddenly starts using cheats and goes from a 1 KD to a 7 or 8 KD. That is, again, another example of creating more and more data points. And theoretically, the possibilities with this are somewhat endless and depend on the technical capability of the team behind it. But generally speaking, there is the possibility that Ricochet will be creating multiple new data points and statistical analysis points to identify cheating accounts, as well as create better separation between brand new accounts and brand new accounts that have been made specifically for cheating. There are other systems that they can throw in the way as well, and some of them were actually available to see in the beta. For example, they have enabled two-factor authentication on certain accounts. I don't know if this is a universal thing, but you will have to have either the Battle.net authenticator or you'll have to have an actual mobile number in order to play the game, which is, again, another hurdle, a hurdle that's fairly easy to bypass to some extent, but it's another hurdle in the way to make things more challenging. They're also going after hardware ID spoofers, which is a way to circumvent cheat providers and create lots and lots of new accounts. And another massive thing that I noticed as well is that in the first couple of days of the beta, they seemed to allow the cheaters to cheat for a few days, collected all the data on what they were doing, and then banned them all in one wave, which meant that they were able to detect early on and use the data from multiple cheat providers early on before the game has even released, and identify some of the methods that they were using and bait them into effectively exploiting the game. And by baiting them, they might now have some more data to counteract the actual release of the game. And of course, Ricochet will have all of the data from Warzone 1 and previous titles heading into this new release as well. Now, will this make a difference? Yes, most definitely. To some extent, these new data points and these new hurdles will definitely make things more challenging, and as Activision continues to sue cheat providers as well, more and more of them will drop off the radar or drop off the map. The extent of how much a difference it will make will be generally down to how regularly they keep updating things and keep on top of things, and how much more challenging they've potentially made the game to exploit. But from my fairly moderate understanding of Anticheat, I think it's safe to say that they definitely have some really good ideas here that could genuinely make a very large difference in the game and make it a cleaner title for everyone. And hopefully this might end some of the, the general hacker hunter, please click my video so I make money accusation videos as well. That would be a much cleaner YouTube world for everyone. Anyways, folks, that's about it for this video. Hopefully this explains what these new implementations and systems might look like, how things are potentially going to improve and what extent they will. If you enjoyed this video, leave a subscribe. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone 2. We'll be covering absolutely everything related to those games going into release, and you don't want to miss any of that. So make sure you're subbed. We're nearly close to 100k, and I'll catch you again in the next one.